Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are just kicking all of our platforms on, so bear with us a moment while all of our other platforms activate so that we can make sure everyone is getting the same feed. Welcome to another live chat with James. Tonight we will, of course, cover some headlines that are happening around the Lower Mainland, as well as some headlines from across Canada and around the globe. Thank you for tuning in. I am again James Cousineau with Live Chat with James here at ProPix TV in Vancouver, British Columbia. Keep in mind that if you wish to call in and share your opinion on any of the stories that we're discussing or on any other topics, you can use the chat feature, of course, or you can call in on a phone line. Yes, we still have a phone line where you can call and be a part of the conversation. That number is area code 604-385-5093. You can call from anywhere in North America. Just dial 1-604-385-5093. If you're calling from overseas, well, I would suggest use the chat feature online, but you can call by the number once again. Country code is 1 for Canada, and then area code 604. Phone number is 385-5093. So let's get started on the show tonight. Welcome to Realized Percept and everyone else who is joining us on the various platforms. We are live on, of course, TikTok, on YouTube, and Facebook this evening. So again, I will be jumping between screens to check and make sure I'm not missing any of your messages. So I will do my best to keep up with you on all of them. Again, don't forget that you can call into the studio at 604-385-5093. But let's get started. And tonight we're going to take a look at the architecture of information. Of course, we're going to talk about the local, global, and national headlines, but then we will take a deep dive into the news and media landscape. How is it that news directors and news assignment editors decide what stories they are going to cover? How do they decide from what angle? Are they going to cover it from a left side, a right side, or are they actually going to offer an unbiased report right down the center to cover both? This is a problem that people are seeing now with the media, is that a lot of newsrooms seem to be biased by one angle or the other, and it is very much shaping the global landscape of opinion. So we'll take a deep dive into that after our news reports. Now, the news landscape in Metro Vancouver over the past week reveals a region grappling with a series of interconnected pressures to test the resilience of social, economic, and civic infrastructure. While individual headlines may appear, disparate, or a deeper analysis will actually show a pattern of systemic strain manifesting across the public safety, labor relations, and essential services. These are not isolated incidents, but symptoms of a broader challenge in painting a comprehensive picture of a metropolis under duress. A significant and alarming theme dominating local headlines is a palpable surge in violent and organized criminal activity within the city of Surrey. This, of course, comes after a very violent couple of days with 4 different shooting incidents, or at least 3 different ones, 2 connected. So we can go with 3 with 2 connections, or we can just say 4 incidents. Now, they are high profile and suggest that there is a deepening public safety crisis going on. Reports have detailed multiple shootings, including a brazen attack in front of the Surrey police station in the Whalley neighborhood, which brought in the necessary lockdown steps, protection steps, and of course safety maneuvers to secure the surrounding area. Further incidents included shots fired at locations of an Indian restaurant, both in Surrey and Maple Ridge, indicating a coordinated and targeted campaign rather than isolated acts of aggression. In response from law enforcement, it has been active. They have charges laid in several of these high-profile cases. Following the police station shooting, a 34-year-old suspect was charged with a slate of offenses, including unauthorized possession of a firearm and assaulting a police officer. In parallel, investigations into a series of extortion-related offenses dating back several months have also resulted in charges against multiple individuals. This, again, is something that we are seeing that is potentially connected to the Bishnoi gang in India, and even further up the chain that could have ties to the India government. Now, these extortion schemes appear to be a significant driver of the current crime wave that we're seeing, and according to the Surrey Police Service, as of late September, there have been 48 separate reports of extortion-related incidents within the city of Surrey, and that number has actually gone up into the mid-50s, culminating in charges against 3 men in connection with one such shooting. This cluster of events points towards a systemic challenge from organized crime that extends beyond simple street violence, threatening the stability of local businesses and a general sense of security for residents. This repeated targeting of specific communities and business underscores the calculated nature of this criminal enterprise, and it's posing a complex challenge for regional law enforcement agencies. Now let's shift gears and take a look at the simultaneous labor disputes that are going on here locally, provincially, and nationally, of course. But simultaneously, the region is experiencing significant economic disruption stemming from ongoing labor disputes, and most notably that is highlighted by the strike by the British Columbia General Employees Union. This is also known as the BCGEU. Now, it's not merely a political story confined to legislature grounds in Victoria, where thousands of members have been picketing. It's a potent economic force with tangible and increasingly severe consequences for the private sector. The union's job action has strategically targeted the provincial liquor distribution channels, with striking workers expanding their pickets to include more liquor stores and distribution centers. It should also be noted that I did go out to cover one of the picket lines late last week in Surrey, where they were picketing in front of the Surrey Pretrial Services Centre and local jail. Some of these government employees came up and they wanted identification and me to identify who I was, show them my ID, all of this stuff. And because of the tone they took and the attitude, I refused to give them any identification. Normally I would show them my press credentials. But given the attitude, I chose not to, just because I was on a public street filming a public picket line. And again, it just really showed that they think they've got a lot more power than they do, and it comes through in the customer service when you're trying to deal with the provincial government. So I think that that is taking away a lot of support for the workers. But regardless, the downstream effects of the action have been immediate and profound for Metro Vancouver's vibrant hospitality industry. Restaurants, bars, craft beer, and breweries have been left scrambling to secure inventory, with some businesses forced to send staff on long-distance journeys to the Fraser Valley and beyond in search of specific products. This disruption to a critical supply chain has not only created logistical nightmares, folks, but of course it is also increasing operating costs and has also prompted renewed and urgent calls for business owners and industry advocates for fundamental changes to BC's liquor laws. They argue that they create a vulnerable centralized system, which we obviously see right now, and this strike serves as a stark illustration of the intricate... Excuse me. Sorry, folks. Long day, I guess. But in any event, my apologies for that. But in any event, yeah, as I said, they have been looking at this in terms of the interdependencies and, the modernization of the economy, where the public sector labor dispute can directly threaten the viability of private enterprises, highlighting the fragility of supply chains and the widespread economic fallout that results from long-term or prolonged industrial action. So again, very important to remember how this is impacting the local business community, whether it's restaurants and event venues through to the pubs and the bars and, a lot of different areas. So it has deep effects. Strain on the public services and infrastructure. Yes, beyond the immediate crisis of crime and labor strife, a series of other stories highlights a broader theme of public systems and infrastructure struggling under immense strain. The healthcare system, a cornerstone of public service, is showing visible signs of failure. The emergency department at Delta Hospital was forced to shut down for the fourth time this year, closing for a 12-hour overnight period due to a critical lack of available doctors. This recurring failure has led to a local councillor to call for the declaration of a public health emergency, framing the situation not as an anomaly but as a chronic and dangerous deficiency in essential medical services. Now, this theme of systemic stress extends to the environmental and infrastructure oversight. In rural parts of the province, the discovery of an unauthorized and potentially unstable dam on a lake has prompted an evacuation alert for 14 properties due to the imminent risk of failure, raising serious questions about regulatory enforcement and land management. Concurrently, the regional government of Metro Vancouver is navigating a host of long-term, large-scale challenges that underscore the pressures of growth. These include the ongoing efforts to address housing affordability, manage updated regional population projections, and looking to predict slower but less predictable growth. It's also looking at its issues in overseeing a massive multi-billion-dollar infrastructure upgrades like the Iona Island wastewater treatment plant. Once again, a lot of challenges with little solutions, especially as the provincial budget is getting tighter. When viewed collectively, this disparate headlines, they basically look as combining into a single coherent narrative. The crime wave in Surrey, the economic damage from the BCGEU strike, and the critical failures in healthcare and infrastructure are not unrelated problems. They are a distinct manifestation of a region under profound systemic pressure. The core functions of a civic society, the expectation of public safety, the provision of reliable healthcare, and the maintenance of a stable economic environment are facing significant and simultaneous challenges. The stories of the past week are not just about events. They are about visible cracks that are forming in the social contract as public systems struggle to keep pace with the complex economic, social, and demographic demands of a rapidly evolving region. Big issues. But there are some that we're looking at in terms of our national landscape as well. So at the national level, of course, Canadian news narrative is dominated by stories that touch upon the country's core anxieties. This is such as debates about its economic sovereignty, its complex relationship with the United States, and our own internal unity. The headlines reflect a nation navigating a series of high-stakes challenges that question and place the world and its ability to maintain political and economic cohesion at home. The prominent national story of the week, of course, has been the diplomatic and economic maneuvering surrounding the meeting at the White House between Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald J. Trump. The primary agenda item was trade, specifically the contentious U.S. tariffs on steel and a new threat of a 25% tariff on heavy trucks, which loom over the Canadian economy. The official communications following the summit were carefully curated to project optimism. Canadian officials, including Minister Dominic LeBlanc, suggested that progress was made and that deals could be landed quickly, while President Trump himself stated that Canada will be very happy with the outcome. However, this veneer of diplomatic success is set against a backdrop of continued volatility and tension. The economic impact of the ongoing trade disputes is already measurable, with one report that indicates that Canada is now buying 85% less American alcohol than it was a year ago, a direct consequence of retaliatory measures. Furthermore, President Trump's unpredictable rhetoric continues to create an environment of uncertainty. During the visit, he made off-the-cuff remarks about a merger of Canada and the United States, a comment that well, perhaps intended as a joke, as he quickly said, underscores the asymmetrical power dynamic in the relationship. The coverage of this summit is more than just a simple report on a political meeting. It reflects a deep-seated national preoccupation with the United States. It showcases Canada's profound economic dependence on its southern neighbor and the immense political challenge of navigating a relationship defined by a close partnership and the constant threat of economic discussion. Welcome, Fabienko, user 679543, Kenneth. Welcome everybody to the show. Feel free to put your comments or questions up there. I sometimes forget to double check the chat screen, so just bear with me. If you have a question, by all means, you can put it in the chat screen on the various platforms. Keep in mind that you can also call into the show via telephone line live at 604-385-5093. Feel free to call into the show and discuss anything that we're discussing or something totally off topic, including your grandma's chocolate chip cookie recipe or my favorite peanut butter. Now, let's take a look at the East versus West. Yes, the pipeline impasse. A classic and deeply divisive Canadian narrative, again, of interprovincial conflict has been reignited with renewed ferocity. The clash is centered on resource development and environmental policy, pitting Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith against British Columbia Premier David Eby. Now, Premier Smith is aggressively advocating for the construction of a new pipeline project, both one through BC, and she looks at others as well. She wants to transport Alberta's oil and gas to the BC coast for export, a move she frames as essential for her provinces and the nation's economy. Premier Eby, meanwhile, stands in firm opposition, citing environmental risks and the fragile consensus over development along the BC coast. The rhetoric between the two premiers has become an exceptionally sharp issue, highlighting the depth of the ideological divide. Premier Smith has publicly labeled Premier Eby's opposition as un-Canadian, a potent accusation in the national political lexicon. In response, Premier Eby has accused Smith of importing the divisive political style of Donald Trump into Canadian politics. That I can actually see because she has been seen at the White House and at Mar-a-Lago and other places kissing Donald Trump's ass. So yes, I could see where people would make that reference, that she is bringing U.S.-style politics and division into the Canadian realm. And we've seen that firsthand by paying attention to any time that she opens her flytrap of a mouth. But regardless, the conflict has escalated beyond words, with Smith issuing an ultimatum to the federal government, Prime Minister Mark Carney, of course, and giving him until the Grey Cup, a symbolic Canadian deadline to amend or repeal 9 federal laws that she deems detrimental to Alberta's interests. This story is a powerful embodiment of the fundamental economic and philosophical fault line that runs through Canada. The tensions between resource extraction economies and those prioritizing environmental stewardship and climate action. It represents a critical test of national unity, federal leadership, and the ability of the Confederation to reconcile competing regional interests. Well, take that, Alberta. Take that, BC. You notice how the rest of the country just sits back and watches. Or maybe they're just busy watching the Blue Jays games. Yes, they did take a beating from the New York Yankees today. Final score, I'll give you a second to plug your ears if you don't want to know the score yet. But yes, New York beat Toronto today. So the series is 2-1 in the playoff series. This was after Toronto beat New York the first 2 games by a large margin. But yes, tonight was 9-6, the final for New York. Good luck, Blue Jays. Now, let's get on to domestic, political, and legal fault lines. Yes, beyond the dominant narratives of trade and pipelines, several other key domestic issues reveal ongoing debates about justice, governance, and the fundamental principles of Canadian law. The legal saga of the Freedom Convoy protest reached a significant milestone, with organizers Tamara Litch and Chris Barber receiving conditional sentences that include 12 to 18 months of house arrest. The sentencing closes a chapter on a movement that deeply polarized the country and continues to fuel debates about the limits of protest and civil disobedience. Concurrently, a major constitutional debate is unfolding at the highest levels of government. The premiers of 5 provinces have just issued a joint call for Prime Minister Mark Carney to withdraw a federal court submission that seeks to place limits on the use of the notwithstanding clause. The clause, a controversial element of the Canadian Constitution, allows federal or provincial governments to temporarily override certain charter rights. The pushback from significant bloc of premiers against perceived federal overreach into this area signals a fundamental disagreement over the balance of power between Ottawa, the provinces, and, of course, the judiciary. Together, these stories highlight the lingering social divisions from a pandemic era and expose deep-seated disagreements about the very structure of Canadian governance and law. When these national stories are analyzed as a whole, a powerful unifying theme emerges, that of a nation grappling with its own vulnerability. The trade negotiations with the United States reveal Canada's economic vulnerability to policy decisions of a much larger and more powerful neighbor. The pipeline dispute exposes the country's political vulnerability to deep-seated internal divisions fueled by competing regional economies and ideologies. Finally, the debate over the convoy sentencing and the notwithstanding clause point to a vulnerability in a national consensus on fundamental legal and civil principles. The headlines are not merely about political or economy, but they are also about Canada's ongoing struggle to assert our sovereignty, maintain our identity, and preserve our unity in the face of significant and mounting pressures. Excuse me, folks. Sorry, tickle there. Excuse me, my apologies. But to preserve the unity in the face of significant and mounting pressures from both within and from without. So again, very big struggles that we're seeing. Now, as we take a turn to the world stage, the diplomacy, shutdowns, and global crises that are evolving or in the news. On a global stage this week, news is characterized by a web of interconnected crises, where diplomatic efforts in one region are influenced by political and economic instability in others. The dominant narratives revolve around the intractable conflict in the Middle East. The far-reaching consequences of domestic political failure in the United States, and a persistent climate of geopolitical and economic uncertainty across the globe. And I'm just going to double check, make sure we're not missing any of our chat room conversations here, folks. So I apologize if you have been, nope, didn't miss any. Well, that's good. Glad to see it. All right, let's get back here. So as we look at it 2 years after the October 7th attacks that initiated the current war and conflict between Israel and Hamas, and let's now take a look at the conflict and ceasefire negotiations. As it continues to command international attention with a renewed and intense diplomatic push for a ceasefire. Indirect talks between the two parties are underway in Cairo, Egypt, with high-level U.S. delegation, including figures like Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, present to facilitate the negotiations. The stated goal is to implement a U.S.-driven peace plan that would see the release of hostages held by Hamas in exchange for a cessation of hostilities. The negotiations are fraught with complexity. Hamas officials have publicly stated that they are seeking guarantees from the United States and other sponsoring nations that any agreement will lead to a permanent end to the war, not just a temporary pause. Meanwhile, the conflict has taken a significant toll on Israel's international standing. Analysts describing the nation as feeling increasingly fractured or isolated on the world stage. The United Nations has added its voice to the calls for a resolution, appealing for an immediate ceasefire, the unconditional release of all hostages, and a massive surge in humanitarian aid to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. The tensions surrounding the conflict was further highlighted by Israel's interception of another Gaza-bound aid flotilla, with activists on board, including 2 Canadians being detained and facing deportation. This remains the world's most prominent and volatile conflict, with profound humanitarian, political, and diplomatic consequences that ripple around the globe. The U.S. government shutdown and its global impact. Yes, a story of domestic American political dysfunction is having tangible and disruptive effects far beyond its borders. The U.S. federal government shutdown has entered its 8th day, with partisan gridlock showing no signs of abating. The immediate impact on federal workers, who face the prospect of not receiving automatic back pay once the shutdown ends. However, the consequences are now being felt internationally as well. The shutdown has caused significant, got distracted by the screen there, just checking messages there, make sure we're not missing anything. Don't forget to send your likes and invite others to join us on the show. But regardless, the shutdown has caused significant staffing shortages at key federal agencies, including among air traffic controllers. And this has led to widespread flight delays at airports across the United States. And of course, that there in turn affects international travel schedules. In a more unusual consequence, the shutdown has forced the grounding of the U.S. Navy's elite Blue Angels aerobatics team. This has created an unexpected opportunity for the Canadian Forces Snowbirds, who will now serve as the headline act at the prestigious San Francisco Air Show, stepping in to fill the void left by their American counterparts. This episode serves as a clear illustration of how domestic political paralysis in a superpower can have widespread and often unpredictable international consequences, disrupting everything from global travel and logistics to diplomacy and cultural engagements. Now let's take a look at a few other major geopolitical events that are going on, ladies and gentlemen. Beyond these 2 dominant narratives, a survey of other global hotspots provides a snapshot of a world facing multiple simultaneous challenges. The war in Ukraine continues unabated, now in its 1,322nd day. Recent developments include Ukrainian strikes on a Russian ammunition plant and oil terminal, while Russian President Vladimir Putin claims his forces have captured nearly 5,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory this year alone. In Southeast Asia, the crisis in Myanmar has seen a deadly escalation, with reports indicating that a military airstrike on anti-junta protest killed at least 40 people, including children. Political instability is also roiling Europe, where the newly appointed Prime Minister of France resigned just hours after naming his cabinet, plunging the nation into further political turmoil. These geopolitical tensions are contributing to a climate of significant economic anxiety, which is reflected in global markets. The price of gold has surged, and it's cracking the $4,000 per ounce mark for the first time and nearing a record high. This flight to a traditional safe haven asset is a direct response to the cumulative uncertainty generated by ongoing military conflicts, political instability, and of course the U.S. government shutdown. The overarching theme of this week's global news roundup is the profound interconnectivity of instability. These are not a series of isolated incidents, but a complex web of interlocking crises. A political failure in one system, such as the U.S. government shutdown, creates logistical and economic ripples that are felt globally. The price of gold is not a story about a commodity. It is a story about a collective global fear, a barometer of anxiety fueled by the sum of all of the other stories. The wars in Gaza and Ukraine, the political turmoil in Europe, and the paralysis in Washington. All of these things play into it. The world is in a state of flux where political, military, and economic systems are deeply intertwined and under simultaneous severe stress, demonstrating that a failure in one domain can rapidly reverberate through all others. So when people are sitting there and saying, what does it matter? It's not in your country. Well, this clearly shows that the different events that happen in one nation can have a direct impact on one or more events in another nation. Now, let's take a look at our deep dive, decoding the media from public service to profit engine. Yes, where is the media going these days? And why is it that there is such partisan reporting going on? Why are we seeing the news agencies that are more like theatrical entertainment shows than actual real news that's unbiased and honest? We'll take a look at that in just a moment. Folks, a bit of a dry throat. Now, let's take a look at the invisible filter, folks, and what or how events become news. Now, the daily deluge of news presented to the public is not a perfect, unfiltered mirror of reality. It is a meticulously constructed product, the result of a continuous series of decisions that determine which of the infinite events occurring in the world are deemed worthy of attention, and also how they are ultimately framed. To understand the modern media landscape, one must first grasp two foundational theories that govern this process: gatekeeping and agenda setting. These are key parts of that process. Now, these concepts demystify how information is selected, shaped, and prioritized, transforming raw events into the polished narratives we consume as news. As we look at this, of course, it starts with the gatekeepers and the process of selection and filtration. The theory of gatekeepers describes the essential process by which news organizations manage the overwhelming flow of information. Coined by psychologist Kurt Lewin, the theory posits that information travels through a series of channels containing gates, or decision points, which are controlled by the gatekeepers. In a news context, these gatekeepers, reporters, editors, news directors, and now increasingly algorithms perform the crucial function of culling and crafting countless bits of information into a limited number of messages that reach people every day. This filtration is a practical necessity. Every media outlet has a finite amount of space or airtime and must select a small fraction of available stories for that publication or that broadcast. The selection process is not random. It's guided by a complex set of criteria, often referred to as newsworthiness. These criteria can include factors such as timeliness, impact, proximity, prominence of the people involved, novelty, and conflict. These are some of the factors. However, the decision-making is also influenced by less visible forces, including the economic needs of the media organization, its internal policies, its perception of the target audience, and, of course, the professional values of its journalists. A clear example of gatekeeping in action can be seen in the decision by a local Vancouver news outlet that featured a story about a 1,700-pound gourd winning a pumpkin contest. On a day filled with serious news about crime, strikes, international conflict, an editor, a gatekeeper, made a conscious choice that this particular story held value for their audience. This decision was likely based on criteria such as human interest and novelty, elements known to engage viewers. In making this choice, the editor simultaneously decided not to cover another potential story, thereby directly shaping the public's information diet. This single editorial decision, multiplied thousands of times a day across all media outlets, is the mechanism that limits, controls, and shapes the public's knowledge on the totality of actual events occurring in reality. While the rise of citizen journalism and online platforms has introduced new pathways for information, the fundamental role of gatekeepers, whether performed by human editors or social media algorithms, remains central to the media's function. When you look at the agenda setting and telling us what to think about when it comes to the media, beyond simply selecting which stories pass through the gates, the media wields a more subtle but equally powerful influence: the ability to signal the importance of those stories. This is the core agenda setting theory. First articulated by Maxwell McCombs and Donald Shaw, the theory posits that the media doesn't necessarily tell people what to think, but rather what to think about. By dedicating significant coverage, prominent placement, and frequent repetition to certain issues, the media transfers the salience of those issues from its own agenda to the public agenda. The process operates on two distinct levels. The first level of agenda setting is the broad determination of which topics matter. The more an issue is covered, the more important the public perceives it to be. The second level of agenda setting, often referred to as framing, goes a step further. It influences how the public thinks about an issue by emphasizing certain attributes, facts, or interpretations while downplaying or omitting other facts. Now, the extensive cross-platform coverage, for example, the Carney Trump Summit, provides a powerful example of first-level agenda setting. Virtually every Canadian news outlet, from Global News to CTV, the CBC, the National Post, they all dedicated significant resources and prime placement to this story. This collective editorial judgment creates a powerful signal to the Canadian public. This meeting is the most important national issue of the week. That's how it's framed. Now, the framing or second level agenda setting then varied by outlet. Some outlets chose to frame the story around Donald Trump's unpredictable personality, highlighting his merger joke. The frame encourages the audience to think about the story in terms of diplomatic volatility and, of course, personal dynamics. Other outlets frame the story as primarily through the lens of the economic view, focusing on the specific details of tariffs and their impact on Canadian industries. This frame directs the audience to consider the issue in terms of financial urgency and policy substance. Again, two different ways of reporting. Now, these two processes, the gatekeeping and agenda setting, are not separate. They are deeply intertwined and symbiotic. Gatekeeping is the essential prerequisite for agenda setting. An issue cannot land on the public agenda if it is first stopped at the media's gate. The story of unauthorized dam in BC only became a matter of public concern because journalists and editors, the gatekeepers are, first deemed it was newsworthy and allowed it to pass into the public sphere. Agenda setting can then be understood as the cumulative effect of these individual gatekeeping decisions. When a multitude of gatekeepers across a wide range of competing organizations all independently conclude that the Carney Trump Summit is the day's top story, their aggregated decisions create a powerful agenda-setting effect. This, in turn, can create a feedback loop. As the media's agenda shapes public opinion, it can generate pressure for political action, which then creates news events and developments that become fodder for the gatekeepers, starting the cycle anew. Of course, there's the partisan divide. Why news reports from one side or another? And we've had somebody ask about this, Rob. So to respond to one of your questions. Now, the observation that media outlets are increasingly catering to specific political ideologies, creating a polarized landscape of left-wing and right-wing news, is not a sign of journalistic failure, but rather a logical and predictable outcome of the economic forces that now govern the industry. The shift away from a broad-centric model of news delivery is a rational business strategy rooted in the dual market economy and economic structure of the media. The influence of corporate ownership and the powerful incentives of audience targeting in a fragmented digital environment. What does that mean? Well, historically, the business of news has operated in a unique dual market. News organizations serve two distinct sets of customers. They sell content, so newspapers, broadcasts, subscriptions, all of that, to their audience. And they sell the attention of that audience to the advertisers. For much of the 20th century, the advertiser market was the financial backbone of the industry. Advertising revenue often accounted for as much as 70 to 80% of traditional newspapers' income. The economic reality made the size and demographic profile of the audience the single most valuable asset that a news organization possessed. The content was, in effect, the bait used to attract large and desirable audiences that could then be monetized through advertising sales. This model created a powerful incentive to produce content with broad appeal, avoiding overtly partisan stances that might alienate significant portions of the potential market, and by extension, the advertisers seeking to reach them. However, you also have the impact of corporate ownership and consolidation. And that is to look at the contemporary media landscape, and it's basically characterized by a high degree of ownership concentration, with a small number of large publicly traded corporations controlling the vast majority of news outlets. This shift from smaller, often family-owned or private enterprises to large corporate structures has fundamentally altered the industry's primary objective. The primary legal and fiduciary duty of a corporation's executives is to maximize the profits for its shareholders. This imperative can and does, don't mistake it, it does come into direct conflict with the traditional journalistic mission of serving the public interest by reporting the truth without fear or favor. I will repeat that line because I think that is a very important point. It's come into direct conflict with the traditional journalistic mission of serving the public interest by reporting the truth without fear or favor. Something that's really up in the air right now in the US and worldwide. Now, under corporate ownership, news becomes a product line that must contribute to the bottom line. This pressure can manifest in several ways that encourage partisan content. Firstly, corporate owners may have their own political or commercial interests, leading to news coverage that is selected or framed to align with those agendas. Journalists within these organizations report facing both direct and indirect pressure to conform to the priorities of the owners, which can compromise ethical standards of fairness and objectivity. Secondly, consolidation can lead to homogenization of content as co-owned outlets share resources and perspectives, reducing the diversity of voices in that public sphere. One person may be reporting to 12 different news agencies or outlets, such as different newspapers and such, where it used to be that each of those had their own reporters. Now they've consolidated in the interest of profits and revenue. So now you're getting one opinion instead of maybe 6 different opinions or views and from 12 different people. So again, it's really brought it into a streamline. Now, finally, the profit motive, of course, encourages a focus on content that is cheap to produce and has high engagement potential, such as opinion analysis over costly investigative journalism. Partisan opinion is often more engaging and less expensive than neutral, fact-based reporting. So again, I hope that answers some of your questions, Rob. Very important to keep that in mind when you're looking at it, is because it costs more and brings them less revenue. That's why they cover from the left or the right or different angles and not equally on both sides. That is what it comes down to. But the most powerful driver of media polarization, however, is in the fragmentation of the audience brought on by the digital revolution. The internet and cable television shattered the old mass media model. This has created a new environment of near infinite choices. In this new landscape, the most effective business strategy is no longer to appeal to everyone, but to capture and retain a loyal, dedicated niche audience. The easiest and most effective way to build such a community in a politically polarized society is to cater to one specific ideology. And for a clear example, you may be focused really on a conservative side, so that's who that news agency is going to cater to. They're going to come from a perspective of the conservative side, or the liberals, and vice versa. And it just goes that way, where they are looking to get that niche market. Much more profitability, and of course, as I said, you've got that commitment by that audience when you've got them when you're reporting more in line with their beliefs. Now, it definitely leads to the deliberate creation of partisan echo chambers, media environments where individuals are exposed only to information and opinions that confirm their existing beliefs. These outlets are not just selling news, they are selling identity affirmation and a sense of belonging to a tribe like-minded individuals. The strategy is economically potent. A loyal, ideologically aligned audience is more likely to watch a channel consistently, more likely to engage with its content, and crucially, more likely to pay for a subscription to support it. The rise of subscription-based and membership models, a response to the collapse of digital advertising revenue, has only intensified this trend. Retaining a paying subscriber who feels a deep connection to the brand is far more valuable than attracting a fleeting casual reader. Therefore, as the political polarization of the media is not a bug in the system, it's a core feature of the modern media business model. The old economic model that supported a relatively nonpartisan, objective press has been dismantled by technological and market forces. In its place, a new model has emerged where picking a side is most rational and profitable. And that is the pathway they are choosing. An outlet like MSNBC or Fox News in the United States, or a newspaper with a clear ideological bent, thrives by serving a dedicated base. The center has become an economically inefficient and precarious position. The creation of a partisan echo chamber is a direct and predictable consequence of the economic incentives that now dominate the news industry. It's a feature engineered for commercial success, not a flaw in the journalistic process. When you look at the storyteller's craft in distinguishing news from documentary, it's important to keep that in mind as well. Because a common point of confusion for media consumers is the distinction between a news report and a documentary film. Both genres deal with factual events, real people, and important issues, yet they operate under fundamentally different principles and with vastly different objectives. To move beyond the simplistic fact versus fiction dichotomy, it's essential to analyze the profound differences in their purpose, process, narrative construction, and ethical obligations. The core distinction lies not in the content they cover, but in the intent of their creators. The journalistic ideal is objectivity and impartiality. The foundational, albeit debated, often debated, I might add, principle of traditional journalism is objectivity. This ideal dictates that a journalist's role is to present verified facts in a neutral, unbiased manner, thereby empowering the audience to form their own conclusions. To achieve this, journalists are expected to adhere to a set of strict principle and professional ethics that prioritize truth, accuracy, independence, fairness, and impartiality. This is a key tenet of the philosophy is, of course, the segregation of facts from values. The reporter's personal opinions, beliefs, and emotions are to be rigorously excluded from the final report. The process of journalism is one of verification. The journalist's primary task is to answer the 5 W's and H: who, what, where, when, why, and how, as factually as possible. The narrative structure of a news report, such as the inverted pyramid style, is designed for the efficient and dispassionate delivery of information, with the most critical facts presented first. The journalist's stance is that of a detached third-person observer. The unofficial motto, as one analysis puts it, is facts, no commentary. This commitment to impartiality is what positions journalism, in theory, as a fourth estate, an independent institution that holds power to account on behalf of the public. Very important in theory, but where is it now in practice? Now, as we look to a stark contrast, documentary filmmaking, while rooted in factual material, is fundamentally a persuasive, and subjective art form. A documentary filmmaker rarely approaches a subject with the goal of neutral observation. Instead, they typically begin with a specific thesis, argument, or a point of view which they wish to explore and convey to the audience. The filmmaker often acts as an advocate, an activist, or an artist seeking to raise awareness, inspire social change, or evoke a powerful emotional response. To achieve this, documentarians employ a wide range of cinematic and storytelling techniques that are basically anything that are used and really brought into practice by traditional journalism. They look at it and they bring them in, but they don't use them. Now, the narrative is not dictated by the simple chronology of facts, but is carefully constructed in the editing room. Filmmakers use selective editing, musical scores, pacing, visual metaphors to build a specific argument and guide viewers' emotions and intellectual premise on that journey. One of the most powerful tools in their arsenal of a subjective point of view, or POV. By positioning the camera to show the world through a specific character's eyes, or by framing the narrative around a particular perspective, the filmmaker aligns the audience with the chosen viewpoint, fostering empathy and encouraging them to adopt the same perspective. This difference is intent, and it's the intent that is reflected in the ethical landscape of each field. While journalism has established public codes of ethics, the documentary field lacks a single universally adopted equivalent. Ethical considerations in documentaries are often complex and debated on a case-by-case basis, balancing the obligation to be truthful to the facts with the filmmaker's right to present a strong personal vision. The fundamental differences can be crystallized by considering how each medium might cover the same event, such as a freedom convoy. A news organization would be ethically bound to conduct interviews with a wide range of stakeholders: convoy organizers, counter-protesters, Ottawa residents impacted by the occupation, police officials, and politicians from various parties. The goal would be to produce a balanced, multifaceted account that presents the verified facts from all sides, leaving the final judgment to the audience. A documentary filmmaker, however, is free to choose a specific lens. One filmmaker could create a powerful, empathetic film entirely from the perspective of the truckers, using their voice and experience to build a compelling case for their cause. Another filmmaker could produce an equally valid documentary using the fear and disruption experienced by residents of Ottawa, creating a narrative of a city under siege. Both films would use factual material, but their intent would be entirely different. The journalist's primary allegiance is to the facts. The documentarian's primary allegiance is to the story. The distinction is the key to understanding why one is held to a standard of impartiality while the other is often celebrated for its compassionate and sometimes argumentatively passionate or controversial, we'll say, subjective voice. And that depends on the documentary and the filmmaker. What is their goal? What is their story? And what is their angle that they're trying to push? Again, very important to differentiate between them. Now, of course, we also have to take a look at the entertainment imperative. And that's the transformation of news into infotainment. The perception that modern news media increasingly resembles staged drama and controversy for entertainment is not an illusion. It is an accurate observation of a fundamental transformation within the industry. This shift, often described as the rise of infotainment or tabloidization, is driven by relentless economic and competitive pressures that have forced news organizations to adopt the strategies of the entertainment world in order to survive. News is no longer simply a public service. It has become a consumer product, competing in a vast and crowded entertainment market space. When you look at the term Tabloidization describes a style of journalism that prioritizes entertainment value over traditional informational value. This is achieved through a specific set of techniques: the exaggeration of content, the emotionalization of issues, and a strong focus on conflict, scandal, crime, and celebrity. While once the domain of the supermarket tabloids, these strategies have now permeated mainstream news outlets all across all platforms, from print, broadcast, and digital. Research has documented a significant rise in stories that mix news with opinion, a broader trend where tabloidization strategies influence and alter traditional forms of information journalism. This approach is calculated on a business strategy designed to achieve two primary goals. First, to attract new audience in the short term through sensational headlines and visually appealing formats, or as some call it, clickbait. And second, to retain that audience over the long term by building a strong, engaging brand identity. The ultimate objective is not necessarily public enlightenment, but commercial success. As one analysis bluntly states, tabloidization is the means. Commercial success is the end. This often comes at a cost of journalistic depth, with reporting that may lack completeness, critical distance, or objectivity. The primary forces driving this transformation are the advent of the 24-hour news cycle and the hyper-competitive nature of the modern media market. The rise of 24-hour news channels and the instantaneous nature of the internet created a voracious and unending demand for new content. This digitalization has made the work of journalism hugely more dynamic, fostering a high-speed environment where the pressure to be the best and the fastest at all times is a paramount concern. In this race for speed and constant updates, there's often less time available for thorough fact-checking, nuanced analysis, and balanced reporting. More importantly, this new media environment has fundamentally changed the competitive landscape. A news organization is no longer just competing with the newspaper or the television station across town. It's now competing for a finite resource, the audience's attention, against every other form of media and entertainment available. A primetime news broadcast is in direct competition with Netflix, a YouTube influencer, a video game, or a social media feed. In a market defined by entertainment products that are merely informative, are at a severe competitive disadvantage. To capture and hold an audience's attention, content must be dramatic, emotionally resonant, conflict-driven, and visually stimulating. Consequently, for a news organization to remain economically viable, it must adopt the language and techniques of entertainment. This explains the observable shift in news presentation, framing a political disagreement not as a policy debate, but as a dramatic personal showdown between two premiers, as seen in the conflict between Danielle Smith and David Eby, is an effective way to create a compelling television clip, using sensational language to describe a crime wave, or focus on the happy talk and banter between anchors rather than the substance of the news, are not necessarily journalistic failures. They are successful marketing strategies borrowed from the world of entertainment. The corporate ownership structure of most media outlets exacerbates this trend, as the demand for quarterly profits incentivizes chasing ratings and clicks through any means necessary, often prioritizing style over substance. News has been compelled to transform into infotainment because it's no longer operating in a protected sphere of public service. It is fighting for its life in a market that values entertainment above all else. In conclusion, we are looking at cultivating media literacy in a polarized world, folks. This preceding analysis that we've done has deconstructed the intricate architecture of modern media, revealing that the news we consume is not a simple reflection of reality. It is a complex product meticulously shaped by powerful and often invisible forces. The journey from a raw event into a polished news story involves the critical filtering processes of gatekeeping and agenda setting, which determine not only what we see, but how important we perceive it to be. The content is further molded by the powerful economic imperatives of corporate ownership and partisan business models, where profitability and audience loyalty can supersede the traditional mission of objective reporting. Furthermore, a fundamental distinction in creator intent separates the fact-based reporting of journalism from the persuasive storytelling of documentary filmmaking. Finally, the entire industry operates under the immense competitive pressures of a 24/7 entertainment market, which incentivizes the dramatization and emotionalization of news, transforming it into infotainment to capture and hold audience attention. To navigate this complex and often bewildering landscape, the necessary response is not to despair at the state of media, or to embark in a futile search for the mythical, perfectly unbiased source. Instead, the path forward lies in cultivating a robust and critical media literacy. The goal is to empower the audience to become more conscious, discerning, and analytical consumers of information. This involves moving from passive reception to active interrogation of all media content. To that end, every citizen can equip themselves with a set of critical questions to apply to any news story, documentary, or media report that they encounter. This includes who created this and what is their economic incentive? And, is this outlet owned by a large corporation with a specific business interest? Is it funded by subscriptions from a politically aligned audience or by advertising that demands mass appeal? Understanding the business model provides crucial context about the potential pressures shaping that content. Also take a look at what stories are being presented and, more importantly, what stories are being left out. Is the focus on single sensational event while a more complex systemic issue is ignored? This question engages with the concepts of gatekeeping and agenda setting, encouraging a consideration of the editorial choices that have been made. You can also ask, is this content designed primarily to inform me or to persuade me? Is the goal to present a balanced set of verifiable facts for my own consideration? Or is it to guide me to a specific conclusion or emotional response? Recognizing the difference is the intent between journalism and advocacy. Is it a cornerstone of media literacy? I would say it is. How is this story being framed is another question. What language is being used and what emotions is it trying to evoke? Is a political disagreement framed as a substantive policy debate or a personal conflict? Is the language neutral and descriptive, or is it loaded and emotional? And I intentionally added some words to certain stories tonight to give you an example of that. So if you can think back and say, okay, what was he saying about Danielle Smith or Donald Trump or, just different things? There were certain words slid in there, and you may not have caught them at the time, but now I hope that if you rewatch the episode or just happen to think back on it, maybe that will make sense now. Because you have to ask yourself, is the language neutral? Is it descriptive? Is it loaded? Is it emotional? It's going to help you to identify techniques of infotainment and second-level agenda setting at play. So, if you didn't catch those little plugs in there for you, or those little nuggets, then take a look back. But ultimately, the goal of modern media literacy is not to reject all sources as biased, but to understand the nature and origin of the biases, incentives, and frameworks inherent in all sources. By deconstructing the architecture of information, we cease to be passive inhabitants of a media environment constructed for us. Instead, we become more conscious and capable architects of our own understanding. It used to be that there were only certain channels that aired news reports at dinner time and at the 11 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news. Now news is everywhere. It's all around us, folks. From our phones to our tablets to our laptops to our computers, it doesn't matter. It is everywhere. Information is coming at us at a speed like we have never seen before. And for people that are a bit older school, they are used to an old day where they took the news as being unbiased and being fair. Those days are gone. It's all about profitability. It's all about biases, about political alignments. We've seen that, whether it's Democratic side, Republican side, conservatives, liberals, it doesn't matter. There is a political divide when it comes to news media. Very difficult to find unbiased down the center. And that's what we're missing in today's society. We value more the quick little sound bites and video clips on YouTube or on TikTok than we do about reality, about truth, and about honest, transparent reporting. That is why there is such a partisan line when it comes to some of the news and major media outlets. They're just vying for the viewers. In a very oversaturated market, they are fighting to stay alive as businesses. And that is where we are at. I hope that gave you a bit of an idea about behind the scenes, not only in terms of media and news literacy, and why different stations line up different stories, or why there is such a deep divide on the angles of which news media covers stories. They can be covering the same story from a different perspective and give you a whole different emotional range that you're going to experience. Again, it depends on that agenda setting. So once again, folks, I appreciate you tuning in for another live session with James here at ProPix TV in Vancouver, British Columbia. I hope that you'll join again tomorrow. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more live episodes such as this. Don't forget that if you would like to comment on anything that you heard, I'm looking back and forth because I've got several cameras going here. But in any event, if you have any comments that you would like to express, by all means, add them in the comment section. Email us, smile, S-M-I-L-E, at propixcanada.com. That's P-R-O-P-I-C-S Canada.com. Or you can always call the studio voicemail and leave a message at 604-385-5093. And don't forget, that studio line is actually open during live episodes, so you can call in and talk live about the different stories we cover or anything else that you want to discuss. With that, folks, stay safe. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you again, hopefully, tomorrow evening.